Evelyn Marin had never believed she'd leave Earth again, not at her age. At 76, she had settled into a life of simplicity, a garden behind her modest house in the Colorado hills, a tabby cat named Morse, and shelves of dusty journals no one else cared to read. Her hands, though gnarled with time, still moved with quiet precision as she clipped herbs, cataloged linguistic notes, and occasionally lost herself in the strange dreams that had followed her since the Outer Worlds campaign. Dreams of silver cities, voices without mouths, and symbols that pulse with memory. When the sky tore open that morning, it wasn't with fire or noise, but with silence. A humming stillness descended, enough to silence even the wind. Evelyn looked up from her garden. Squinting into the pale blue above as a narrow black vessel, sleek as obsidian glass, drifted over the valley. She recognized its markings instantly, not from fear, but from memory. It was a diplomatic courier ship, the kind she hadn't seen in 4 decades. 3 figures stepped out before the vessel even touched ground. The first was a tall, gold-plated envoy with 4 eyes and no mouth. The second, a humanoid female in the soft green robes of the Galactic Records Guild. The third was unexpected. A human, a young man in a formal Terra Navy uniform. "Dr. Evelyn Marin?" he asked, removing his cap with nervous hands. "I haven't been called that in a long while," she replied, wiping soil from her palms. "We were told you might say that." He stepped forward. "You are formally requested by the Galactic Sovereign Council. There's an urgent matter requiring your unique expertise." Evelyn raised a brow. "I don't teach anymore. I don't translate for diplomats. And I certainly don't travel off-world just because someone asks nicely." The envoy extended a smooth metallic arm. A scroll, ancient and dust-covered, hovered in its grip. Evelyn's eyes narrowed as it unrolled, revealing glyphs carved into what looked like petrified bark. She hadn't seen that script in nearly 50 years, but it was etched into her mind like scars on stone. "That symbol," she whispered, pointing. "Where did you find this?" "In the Emperor's private reliquary," the robed woman answered. "The Emperor is gravely ill. He believes the cure lies in these texts." Evelyn stepped back. "Impossible. That language predates your council. It predates the Empire. No alien species has ever translated it. Even I could barely make sense of its root dialect. Yet your early notes," the human officer said, "are the only known partial deciphering in existence. We believe the Emperor's condition is connected to this language. We don't ask for your service, Dr. Marin. We beg for your help." Evelyn said nothing. Her eyes remained on the glyph, on that one symbol, an angular spiral nested in an open palm. She had drawn it 100 times. Once in the sands of Terra during an expedition, once in a fevered dream, once on the inside of her own wrist, when she was too drunk to remember why. She turned away. "I'm too old for politics." "This is not politics," the envoy replied, its voice entering her mind without sound. "This is memory." Later that night, Evelyn packed a single satchel. No clothes, just her old journals, a solar flask, and a tiny data drive she hadn't touched in years. She didn't say goodbye to Morse. Cats never needed such things. Before she boarded the vessel, she looked once more at the sky, wondering if it would be the last time she'd see her son. The ship was silent inside. It moved with the grace of thought, sliding through space like a dream unfolding. Evelyn spent the journey in a private chamber, reading over her old notes. The more she read, the more unsettled she became. The dialect wasn't just Proto-Etheric, it was older, rooted in something even Terran archaeology never acknowledged. A pre-seed language, theoretical and forbidden. A linguistic bridge between intention and reality. The closer they drew to the core worlds, the more Evelyn's dreams intensified. Visions of hollow palaces, of voices crying out in silence. She heard a name whispered again and again. Kael'thorn. Not a title. Not a name from books. A name from the deep, from something that reached across time to find her. When the ship finally descended, Evelyn stood before the great capital of the sovereign empire. It was a place she had read about, but never seen, Zerethal Prime, the throne world. The entire city glowed with soft gold and deep crimson, like a jewel floating on a sea of stars. At the center stood a spire that pierced the sky itself, wrapped in living metal and adorned with carvings that shimmered and shifted under her gaze. She was led through grand halls of impossible geometry, past beings of every known species, and many she had never encountered. None spoke. All stared as she passed, whispering in languages that died before Earth had language at all. Finally, she entered the throne chamber. It was circular, surrounded by delegates and guards, each one more alien than the last. But at the center, seated on a throne of living crystal, was a figure she immediately recognized from dreams she'd never understood. The Emperor. Kale Tharn was not young. His skin, a pale obsidian blue, shimmered with tiny motes of gold. His crown was not metal but bone, grown from his own head. His eyes, ancient and clouded, locked onto Evelyn with terrifying clarity. And when he rose, even the guards flinched. He stepped forward and knelt before her. "I greet you, voice of the origin." Evelyn froze. "I am no voice. I am a translator." "No," Kale Tharn whispered, taking her hands. "You are the key." Gasps echoed through the chamber, not just at the Emperor's words, but at his gesture. An emperor bowing to a Terran? To a woman most of them considered ancient and irrelevant? "Why am I here?" Evelyn asked. The Emperor's grip tightened. "Because I am dying, and only the word can restore what is broken." She looked down at her own hands, trembling now not with fear, but with memory. She had seen this before, felt this moment, decades ago, like a phantom echo from a future that should not have been. "How do you know the word even exists?" she whispered. Kale Tharn smiled faintly. "Because I dreamed of you before I was born." That night, Evelyn sat in a chamber of gold and firelight, alone but not afraid. Her mind burned with questions she couldn't form. Outside the chamber, alien leaders debated, argued, panicked. Some called for war, others for exile. A few whispered of prophecy. But Evelyn sat in stillness, her fingers tracing a single symbol on her old journal, the spiral in the open palm. She didn't know what came next, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The word was real, and it was already waking. The chamber Evelyn was escorted to the next morning bore no resemblance to the palatial opulence she'd seen the night before. It was stark. Stone walls etched with glyphs that shimmered faintly when she passed them, a single slab of obsidian serving as a table, and no chairs. A place of ritual, not comfort. Waiting inside was a figure draped in violet robes, eyes like molten mercury set into a face that shimmered with changing contours, as if memory itself refused to define her completely. "I am Tse Vel," the figure said, voice fluid and layered. "High Curator of the Echo Archive. You are not here for diplomacy. You are here to open what none of us can." Evelyn glanced at the slab. A scroll rested atop it, its surface dry and cracked, but the glyphs carved into it pulsed gently, like breath held in stone. "I told your envoys," Evelyn said, "my knowledge is partial at best. I didn't come to unlock secrets. I came to understand why the Emperor thinks I can." Tse Vel moved toward her with the smoothness of mist. "It is not about knowledge. It is about inheritance. You carry the trace." Evelyn's laugh was short and bitter. "You think bloodlines matter? I studied these symbols because no one else would." "No," Tse replied, touching the scroll reverently. "Because you were meant to. The word chooses its vessel." Before Evelyn could respond, the chamber shifted, not physically, but perceptually, like her eyes had adjusted to a second layer of reality. The glyphs brightened. The air thickened. The scroll's pulse matched her heartbeat. A door dissolved behind her. 2 guards entered, flanking a smaller figure. Not Kale Tharn, a child. The girl couldn't have been more than 9, her skin a muted lilac, her eyes large and gold-ringed. She held a tablet carved from living crystal and watched Evelyn with open, unguarded curiosity. "She is the Emperor's granddaughter," Tse said softly, "born with no voice, no name yet chosen. We call her the listener." Evelyn knelt, stunned by the clarity in the girl's gaze. The listener stepped forward and placed the crystal tablet in Evelyn's hands. On it, a single phrase had been etched, for glyphs that Evelyn recognized instantly but hadn't seen arranged this way before. You wrote this?" she asked. The girl nodded once. Saya's voice was nearly a whisper. No AI, no scholar. No Sia has been able to translate those 4 glyphs. Can you? Evelyn traced the shapes with trembling fingers. One symbol meant remembrance. Another, open. The third was an imperative particle, command, not suggestion. The last one, her breath caught. Return the root to the source, she said aloud. It's not a sentence. It's an invocation. The scroll flared. The chamber's walls bloomed with light. Say turned sharply to the guards. Send for the Emperor. Moments later, Kael'thorn entered. Not carried, not escorted, but walking slowly under his own power, draped in deep crimson robes. Despite his apparent frailty, his presence stilled the chamber like gravity itself. You saw the glyphs, he said. I understood them, Evelyn replied. Partly. They're not just language. They're activation keys. Yes, he murmured, taking a place across the slab from her. And they were never meant for us. Then for who? She asked, heart-pounding. He looked at her with something between sorrow and awe. For those who left the seed behind. You are them. Evelyn stood frozen, as understanding pressed down like an avalanche. You think I'm a descendant of some progenitor species? She said, incredulous. That Earth humans are what, galactic ancestors? Not all humans, Kael'thorn said. Just those who still carry the word. It wasn't belief. It wasn't theory. It was fact to him. You're wrong, she said quietly, but her voice betrayed the doubt blooming in her chest. The listener approached her again and gently placed her hand on Evelyn's wrist. The warmth that flooded through Evelyn's body was immediate, like light uncoiling through veins long dormant. Her vision tunneled inward, past memory, past thought, to a place made of sensation and pattern. There, she saw them, beings of light and root and song, shaping language not to communicate, but to sculpt reality. They looked vaguely human. Or perhaps humanity had merely inherited their reflection. When she returned to herself, the chamber had gone still. Even the glyphs had dimmed. She gave you the glimpse, Kael'thorn said. Now you see. The sickness that plagues me is not a body. It is dissonance. My blood carries the echoes of the origin, but they have fallen silent. Without the word to bridge the fracture, I will fade. Evelyn took a long breath. What exactly do you expect me to do? Say, place a second scroll on the table. This one sealed with an iron clasp carved into shape of the spiral glyph. We need you to translate and awaken the text, to perform the raveling. Evelyn paled. That ritual hasn't been attempted in 1,000 years, and never by a human. It never needed to be, Kael'thorn said, until now. She looked down at the scroll, at the faint shimmer of potential dancing across its surface. Inside it lay truths buried for millennia, truths that might shatter empires or save them. And somehow, impossibly, she was the only one who could release them. Outside the chamber, alarm bells sounded, deep, gong-like tones reverberating through the walls. One of the guards turned sharply toward the door and received a silent message through a neural band. His posture stiffened. Say looked up. What is it? The guard bowed his head. The Sons of the Hollow have declared Kael'thorn unfit. A fleet approaches. They demand abdication and a purge of all pre-seed artifacts. Kael'thorn's face tightened. They fear the past. They want ignorance to rule. Evelyn stared between them. You didn't just bring me here to cure you. You brought me here to stop a war. Say nodded. We brought you here to remind the galaxy what it has forgotten, or to die trying. Evelyn turned to the listener, who still stood calmly, her gaze unwavering. The girl reached into her cloak and offered Evelyn a worn patch, shaped like an open eye above a spiral. Evelyn hadn't seen that symbol since her academy days. It had been dismissed then as apocryphal, an old Terra myth of forgotten order called the Way Speakers, storytellers who shaped fate through language. The patch was real. The myth was not a myth. She took it, her fingers closing around it like a lifeline. I'll begin at dawn, she said. Kael'thorn bowed his head. Then the last hope of my blood begins with your breath. The chamber chosen for the raveling was unlike anything Evelyn had seen across all her decades of study and travel. It was ancient, not in the architectural sense, but in the way certain places feel older than time itself. Circular, domed, and open to the stars, it pulsed with a low hum that she didn't so much hear as feel in her bones. The floor was composed of obsidian slabs, veined with pulsing amber light that shifted patterns like a breathing organism. Above, the stars of the core spiraled in a slow dance, framing the ceremony in cosmic gravity. She stood at the center of it all, clad not in robes of honor, but her own faded earth jacket, now marked with the insignia of the way speakers sewn carefully beside the original patches. The embroidered spiral glowed faintly, not by technology but by resonance. On the altar before her rested the sealed scroll, unopened. Around the edges of the chamber stood the high delegates of the Galactic Council, silent and stone-faced. Some watched with curiosity, others with veiled contempt. Many simply didn't understand why one frail Terran elder had been summoned to speak ancient words over their dying emperor. Kale Tharn sat cross-legged opposite her, his breathing shallow but steady. A thin braid of golden thread linked his wrists to hers, an old rite symbolizing soul-bonded witness, a bridge between translator and recipient. It was fragile, intimate, irrevocable. Tse Vel stood just beyond the altar, her usually inscrutable face heavy with quiet tension. The listener stood beside her, a silent anchor in the roiling tide of uncertainty. Evelyn placed her hands gently on the scroll, and the clasp fell open at her touch. There was no dramatic flare, no audible cue, just a quiet release of pressure, as if a held breath had finally exhaled after millennia. The scroll unrolled itself, glyphs igniting row by row, casting warm light across her weathered face. She spoke. At first, the words were fragmented, halting, broken relics of a language born before form. Each glyph required not just translation, but emotional anchoring, memory, feeling, the inner music of the soul. Evelyn's voice trembled, but each syllable she pronounced bent the air around her. As she chanted, her words pulled color into the space, tones of gold and azure coiling in elegant spirals. The glyphs floated upward, becoming luminous shapes that danced like insects drawn to flame. Kale Tharn's eyes rolled back, his body jerking once. The council moved in alarm, but Tse raised a single hand. Do not break the link. She has begun the binding. Evelyn continued. The language pulled from her more than sound. It drew memories from the deepest well of her being. Her childhood on Earth, alone after the collapse of her family. Her first encounter with alien linguistics and the thrill of discovery. The ache of being dismissed, marginalized, erased. She felt her doubts rise and the glyphs dimmed. Then the listener's gaze met hers across the altar, a silent transfer of resolve. Evelyn steadied. She reached the invocation line, one she hadn't fully deciphered until this very moment. It was not a command or a request. It was a sacrifice. The glyphs formed the phrase, I yield the self to restore the song. In that moment, a searing pain lanced through her chest, and her vision flared white. The room around her fell away. She was no longer Evelyn, not in the way she had always understood herself. She was standing on a vast plain of light, stars crashing silently above, surrounded by beings made of sound and symbol. They spoke without words, and yet she understood them. They showed her the truth. The origin had not been a race or an empire, but a pattern, one seated in many species, humanity included, a genetic resonance woven into language, emotion, rhythm. The word was never just about translation. It was a code embedded in existence itself, a harmonic signature that, when spoken correctly, could rethread the fraying tapestry of consciousness. But it came at a cost. She had opened the path, and now she was a path. Her body returned to the chamber, kneeling now, the scroll ash in her hands. Her hair had turned white as frost. Her breathing slowed. The golden thread between her and the Emperor began to burn bright, then dissolve into rising light. Kale Tharn gasped. He sat bolt upright, eyes glowing with layered color, as if galaxies had opened behind him. His back straightened. His voice, when it returned, was deeper, infused with chords not native to his body. I am restored, he said, though it was not just his voice. The fractures mended. Evelyn collapsed. Tse was beside her in an instant, catching her before she struck the stone floor. Her hands hovered uncertainly. There was no precedent for how to touch someone who had spoken the true word. The listener moved forward, placing her small hand on Evelyn's heart. The glow returned, gentler now. Evelyn stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, dim but aware. "I'm still here," she whispered. "You were almost not," Say said, her voice shaking. "You reached the threshold." "I had to," Evelyn murmured. "It's not just about healing Kael'thorne. It's about reminding the galaxy who we used to be." Around the chamber, the delegates stood silent, the most skeptical among them, massive beings wrapped in neural armor and bred for skepticism, were visibly shaken. None could deny what they had witnessed. No technology, no psychic, no ritual of the old empires had ever produced such resonance. Kael'thorne stood and extended his hand to Evelyn. She took it with great care. He helped her to her feet, then bent low, not in weakness but in reverence, before the entire council. The Emperor of the sovereign galaxy knelt before a human woman. "My voice is yours," he said, "as yours became mine." The council chamber, for a long moment, was still. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, the delegates of 14 star nations lowered their heads. Evelyn blinked through tears that came not from pain, but from awe. She looked at the listener, who smiled without speaking, and placed the crystal tablet back in Evelyn's hand. It now read a single word: "Remember." As the chamber emptied and the stars wheeled on above, Evelyn felt a quiet shift within her. She had given part of herself to something vast, something eternal, and in return had gained not power, but understanding. She had become a bridge. But bridges always stood between two sides, never fully belonging to either. And somewhere deep inside, she knew this wasn't the end. It was the first word of a much older sentence that was only just beginning. The days following the raveling were unlike anything Evelyn had experienced, even the most surreal chapters of her long and strange life. She moved through Zirthal Prime as a ghost cloaked in reverence, both among the aliens who bowed as she passed and the diplomats who now spoke her name with mixture of fear and awe. Though her body remained weakened, her mind burned with clarity. She no longer needed translation devices. Languages once incomprehensible now unfolded before her in thought, rhythm, and resonance. Every glyph, every uttered syllable, came with meaning and weight. It wasn't fluency. It was alignment. Kael'thorne had recovered beyond expectation. He no longer spoke in royal proclamations, but with a stillness that unnerved his advisors. There was a softness to him now, tempered by the touch of whatever essence Evelyn had bridged. He invited her to sit on the high dais during council gatherings, not as an interpreter, but as a witness, one whose presence alone changed the tone of the debates. The sons of the Hollow, the radical separatists who once threatened civil collapse, had vanished into silence. The memory of the raveling had gone viral across every known network, its imagery encrypted and studied with religious fervor. But the galaxy, as Evelyn had come to understand, was not healed by spectacle. She spent her time with the listener, now named Ayla by her grandfather in the first official decree after his recovery. The girl remained mostly silent, but her mind spoke volumes. She shared impressions, images, and symbols that even Evelyn sometimes struggled to decipher. Together, they traced ancient maps of forgotten constellations, sketched overlapping languages buried in artifacts once dismissed as decorative, and reconstructed fragments of songs encoded in the ruins of long-dead civilizations. Ayla absorbed knowledge as though born to recover it. "You're not just the Emperor's heir," Evelyn told her one quiet evening on the palace terrace. "You're a weaver of memory. You'll carry this forward when I no longer can." Ayla looked up at her and offered a smile, one so complete it made Evelyn's chest ache. She'd never had children, never thought she'd be capable of guiding another life, let alone a galactic legacy. And yet, here she was, guardian, teacher, something dangerously close to a grandmother. Despite the peace blooming around them, Evelyn felt a pressure building beyond what anyone could name. It wasn't political. It wasn't even personal. It was dimensional, a whisper at the edges of her mind, repeating a single phrase in the tongue she had spoken during the raveling. "The thread is not mended, only held," She mentioned it to Kael'thorne during one of their walks through the memory gardens, vast archives encoded into living flora that pulsed with genetic memory. He listened without interruption, then placed a hand over his heart. I feel it too. The raveling was not a cure. It was a pause, so the sickness could return. No, not sickness. Fragmentation. The galaxy is a great tapestry, and some threads have frayed beyond repair. You tied them together long enough for understanding to begin, but the true restoration must come from more than one voice. Evelyn looked at the stars above, their patterns strange to her Terran-born gaze. I'm not sure I have another bridge left in me. Kael'thorne shook his head. You won't be the one to weave the next bond. She will. He gestured toward Ayla, visible in the distance, humming silently to a vine that glowed in response. Evelyn nodded. Then I must prepare her. Word came that same evening from the Archive Guild. Deep scans of the scrolls as remnants had revealed something remarkable. Hidden behind the raveling text was a cipher, encoded in harmonic resonance. A second layer, a deeper sentence. And only the one who had spoken the original invocation could access it. Evelyn agreed to return to the raveling chamber, though her steps were slower now. Her body continued to diminish, her joints stiff, her breath short. She felt like a worn vessel, still intact but growing thin at the edges. Inside the chamber, the ritual floor had changed. The amber light now pulsed in a spiral, echoing the shape of her old waste speaker patch. The same spiral Ayla now wore over her heart. At the center of the chamber rested not a scroll, but a single glyph suspended in a cage of starlight, a memory held in resonance. Evelyn stepped toward it, one palm raised. The glyph spun faster, responding to her presence. She touched it gently, and the chamber fell away once more. But this time, she did not see the planes of light or the ancient song beings. She saw Earth, not Earth as it was, but as it had been and could be. Green valleys and ash-choked skies, towers grown from coral and machines humming lullabies to children. She saw languages never recorded, faces never born, and choices unmade. 1,000 possible timelines fanned out before her, each tethered to the same thread of memory. In the center stood a single phrase, radiant and terrifying in its simplicity. What you preserve becomes what you are. Evelyn returned gasping, her hands trembling, her heart fluttering in uneven rhythm. Ayla was already by her side, helping her down gently. The glyph faded, satisfied. She knew then her time was ending. In the final days, she wrote feverishly, journals, notes, partial dictionaries, songs encoded in fractal spirals. Not for scholars. For Ayla, she whispered instructions to the girl each night. How to listen between silence, how to feel words before shaping them, how to hold history without letting it crush the present. And when the end came, it was not with pain but with quiet. She passed in the raveling chamber, seated upright, hands resting on her old journal and the empty scroll tube. Ayla found her that morning. The child did not cry. Instead, she traced a new glyph into the floor beside Evelyn's feet. It pulsed once and remained glowing, a name in the old tongue, meaning Bridgekeeper. The council declared a week of galactic mourning. But Kael'thorne did not hold a funeral. Instead, he summoned leaders from all known species to the Grand Synaxis. Ayla stood beside him, her robe etched with both the Imperial sigil and Evelyn's spiral. In her hand, she held the crystal tablet, now bearing not just a word, but a sentence. We remember to remain. That day, the new linguistic covenant was signed, an agreement that all surviving pre-seed languages will be protected, studied, and shared without borders, not as weapons, not as tools of politics, but as fragments of a shared becoming. Ayla was named High Weaver of the Wayspeakers, and somewhere in the cold hills of Colorado, under a quiet blue sky, a garden continued to grow where Morstacat now lived peacefully among the herbs. No one noticed when the spiral-shaped flower bloomed behind the old house, golden and flickering, its petals humming a tune no one could quite remember learning. But the wind carried it anyway.